Hello and welcome to another episode of Startup Lantern, a show for all the budding entrepreneurs out there. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about market and customer analysis. And as we go into this, I want you guys to remember that we're not attorneys. We don't even play one on TV. We're just some people who have gone through this a number of times, and we have the battle scars to prove it. And to our greatest extent, we're going to try to impart some of that information onto you so that you don't have to learn the hard way as you're going through this. And some of these concepts will be a little bit more familiar to you by the time you actually get to them. I'll be your co-host. My name is Drews McFarland.
And I'm John Duran. Thanks for joining our episode today. In our last episode, we covered research, and we talked about two topics that we felt really deserved an additional amount of coverage. That really the market analysis, the customer analysis, and preparing to build your business plan. If you're going to start a company, and especially if you're going to be asking for funding, you must have a really good understanding of the market that you're targeting and how your customers are going to perceive your product. Today, we're going to dig into those topics, so join us.
As we go into the year 2023, a lot of people out there are kind of looking very worriedly at the market, worried about whether or not we're going into a recession. And you may be wondering if you're trying to do a startup or if you've been considering doing a startup, is now even the time? So I wanted to start off this show by talking a little bit about some really sage advice I got from somebody. And this was during 2009. We were in the middle of the housing crisis. It was one of the bigger financial meltdowns that the country had ever faced. And this guy who had been, again, a serial entrepreneur, founded a number of different large companies, multimillionaire, many times over. He was getting ready to go off and start his own new company again. And I asked him, is this really the time for you to be doing this? I mean, the market's kind of going into the hole right now. And he said, well, after doing this a number of times, I found when the market's up, you sell. When the market's down, you build. And it makes actually a lot of sense. If you're going to be building something, you want to build things when labor is the cheapest, when stuff is the cheapest, when people are looking for stuff to do, when maybe there's people who are laid off that you can pick up. It's a lot less competitive then. And there's no expectation when the market's down for you to be having something that's ready to sell right away. By the time you actually have built something and it's ready for the market will have corrected itself and people will be buying again, and you'll be well established and well ready to be able to actually take advantage of that opportunity. So, if you're thinking about doing a startup, you may not find another opportunity as good as 2023 in the next 10 years. I mean, you're looking at an ideal circumstance, and you don't want to be there, 10 years from now, looking back thinking, boy, I had this really great idea and I probably should have executed on it, but I didn't. Those types of regrets are things that sort of eat away at you for a long time. So think about this now. This may be a really good opportunity. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're here. We're here to try to help some people maybe take some of the uncertainty out of the entire equation so that you'll be able to go in there with a degree of confidence that you wouldn't normally have had to go through.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit starting with the customer analysis. So who is your target customer? Well, there's a lot of different ways to target customers. We've seen companies that start focused purely on an industry. Maybe they're focused on healthcare or retail. I've seen at least a couple companies that focus on a specialization. And like, for instance, they specifically target managed service providers. There's a lot of groups that frequently target things like Fortune 1000, or maybe the small, medium business market, or maybe even public sector. And then lastly, I've seen a few companies that tend to focus on more of a specialization around what customers are targeting, such as the network edge or the cloud edge, focused on those kind of things. Regardless of who you target as your customer, the more clearly you can identify your customer early on, the better your business plan will be. And the better your business plan is, and the more clearly you can define your target customer, the easier it will be to get a realistic measure of your potential success with your new business.
And I'd like to just kind of interject there too, because when we talk about a target customer, obviously get down to the extent that you can and From there, you may even want to jump in and get hyper specific. So in other words, you've come up with this idea and it's going to revolutionize the one specific industry, and you're like, stopping there at a target market or a target industry, or even though you think that you've got it pretty well defined, what is sometimes a really good exercise to do is to actually literally choose a company, and sometimes even inside that company, a person that is really indicative of who you want to try to service. Because if you service that person 100%, you're going to be able to produce a 99% solution for everybody else in that market. Sometimes by being overly broad with who you're trying to target your product toward, can spread you pretty thin and make it so that you're chasing down too many things all at once. Often you're very resource constrained as you're building something out. So the more tightly you can define that thing, the better. You're never going to be badly misled by being, choosing that initial target customer as tightly as you can, so you really understand, who their name is.
So once you've identified the customer that you're going after, the next thing is to understand who inside that customer's organization are you going to be targeting as your audience. What are the roles that are important as you move into this business? Don't assume that just because you're starting a security business, the CISO is your target. I've seen companies where the solution was built around cybersecurity. And in one instance, I had a company that started a cyber company focused on securing the tenants in a particularly multi-tenant office building. What was interesting is that the customer that they were targeting with their business was the building owner himself or herself, not the individual tenants in the building.
No, that's actually a really good point. And that's actually a mistake that a lot of startup security organizations will have when they go in. They'll think, because I'm security, you want to go to the CISO, they're the decision maker, well, guess what? That person's never going to return your call. So you've got to figure out, even if you've got a product that is, really, really resonates with the CISO, don't assume that you're going to be able to speak to him. So start by figuring out how you're actually going to get in front of that person. And usually that ends up being, you have to have a message, and you have to have a product that speaks well to some influencer a little bit lower than him, and he will escort you into that office, because you're never going to get that phone call unless you're a Fortune 500 company.
So once you know your customer and you've got a good idea of who you're targeting, then the question is, how as a company do you plan to sell your product? There's a lot of different avenues for this approach. We've seen things like the online marketplaces are really a strong new approach that maybe didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago. Lots and lots of companies still focus on building a private sales team to go out into the field and sell the product. We also see a lot of interest, particularly in the startup market right now, looking at trying to make connections and partnerships with value-added resellers and system integrators, hoping that they can use the sales forces that are already in place to go sell their product. And while that sounds easy, it's never really the case. You need to have something that's either extremely unique, almost one of a kind, or at least very niche market for them to be able to show interest in you. Because you have to remember, value-added resellers and system integrators, they have to make money, and they have to focus on the partners that offer them the biggest opportunities. They have limited time, and they cover a lot of products and a lot of vendors, and you're just going to be a small fish to them when you're starting out.
There's an expression that you'll often hear in this, and that's called, you're researching what the buyer's journey is going to end up being. And understanding, your product and how your product would actually end up getting adopted inside of these organizations. It's not necessarily through the way that you would imagine it. As he mentioned, there's different sales channels. Different sales channels will have different access to different people, or maybe you don't even need to have a sales channel. If your product is going up on the AWS marketplace, it may not. But start thinking now about what your buyer's journey is going to end up looking like and how you're going to get in front of them.
I've spent a lot of time working in and with large system integrators and value-added resellers. And one of the things I will share is, if you plan to go that route, make sure you take time to research their business model as well. Make sure you're mapping yourself cleanly to a partner and you understand their vocabulary. What are their comp models? What is their target customer base? Does it match the ones that you're working with? Do they understand your market and how you're planning to message? what will it take for you to educate the channel partner on your messaging and the way you planned it to target the audience within the customer base?
And then the next part that you have to start wondering about, and again, if you're going to be up in front of some venture capitalists, ultimately they're going to want to be very interested in what is the size of the market that you're actually going to be able to address. And this is one of the traps that a lot of people can fall into, is if you aren't specific enough, you lose credibility. If you're not broad enough, you end up not being at a level that would actually attract them. So you really want to be as specific as possible. You think about the market. Like one of the mistakes that you see a lot of rookie startups doing, and we call it like the Chinese problem, where you're like, oh, our total addressable market is China. And if we can just get 1% of all the Chinese people to buy this thing, then we're going to be set for life. We're like, well, there's no way that you're actually going to be able to do that. So be more realistic with what your addressable market is. You think, okay, so is my market going to be the Fortune 500? Great. Let's get more specific than that. Okay, so it's people with maybe they're multinational. Maybe they're like, you have to keep on carving down and carving down and carving down. And then once you've gotten that, like this is what I think the actual genuine market is, then you still have to figure out what percentage of that do you really think is legitimate for you to be able to actually execute on.
As you go through the process of capturing or documenting the total addressable market for your business plan, make sure you document all the assumptions you make. How did you arrive at your assumptions? Where did you track this information from? What resources did you use during your research of that? That info will come in really important as you start approaching venture capitalists, because they want to be able to validate the numbers that you've put into your business plan. And something critically important to remember is don't look for a static total addressable market. You really want to approach your business looking at a market that's continuously growing, so that there's continual growth capacity for you and your business beyond just the first year of operation.
Let's talk for a moment about some of the tools that you can use to be able to figure out what your total addressable market is. Now, unless you're really lucky, and I use that with air quotes, you're not going to have a total addressable market that's going to be actually tracked by a large market research firm like a Gartner or a Forrester or something like that. It's very rare that you're going to end up finding yourself in a circumstance where there's the magic quadrant automatically laid out for you. And if you do, you're up against some pretty stiff competition already, because the market's grown to the point where it's on the number of people's radar already. So generally speaking, you have to be a little bit more creative about trying to identify what your total addressable market is. Like your usual suspects of tools to be able to figure that out are things like Google. Obviously you can't search for what is the addressable market of X unless, again, it's starting to get popular enough that people have actually started talking about it. So often what you end up having to do is figure out, okay, so I think that, after I chase this down and this down and this down, I'm thinking that these are the companies that I would probably be servicing the best. So then you'd be jumping in and taking a look at are those companies public? Can you figure out what the size of their organization are? So you can start digging through some of the public records to see their size, how many users how many employees they end up having, where they're distributed, where they are. Business was sometimes the annual reports give you some good information, but those have a tendency of being really advertisements for the company. So sometimes, while there is going to be some information in those that ends up being useful, you go into things like the 10Q report as well, might give you some additional information. You're talking about some pretty heavy slogs through some public data, to be able to figure out some of those things. Another tool that I like to use is a website called Wolfram Alpha. Think about it as being like the Google for data. So you can actually go in there, and if you're looking for basic information about like how many males between the age of 20 and 30 are there in Arizona, you'd be able to pull information like that out. So all kinds of information in terms of sort of broader, if you've got something that's a little bit more commercial or a little bit more consumer related, sometimes that's going to end up being useful, especially as you get into international sales and if you think that there's a good opportunity for you there. Um, Also, again, if you're dealing with companies that aren't, if you think that there's a group of companies, but they're not necessarily publicly registered and that data is not, is available, sometimes you can get information through one of my favorite sources, and that's Crunchbase. You can go in there and you can get some general ideas as to how large they are, what kind of revenues that they're making, whether or not they've gone through rounds of funding, et cetera. So, basically, trying to come up with your total addressable market is going to be a degree of creativity. And when you do that and you combine it and you get it together to the point where you put it inside of your pitch deck or your business plan, really what you have to be able to do is show your work. I mean, nobody's expecting you to be perfect. These things are often estimations. It's just going to end up being a matter of can you present something that's defensible, and if you can, then you basically achieved what you need to achieve. You want it to be able to hold up to that degree of scrutiny, and nobody's going to knock you for 5 years from now you got this figure off by $100 million or whatever. It's just meant to give a general idea, and if it's that important, they will, the VCs out there are going to come back and educate you as to how they would like to look at it anyway. But you need something to show your work, to show that you've actually given some thought and consideration to it.
Thanks for joining our episode on customer and market analysis. We have a lot of interesting topics coming up in future episodes as we cover other aspects of the 3 Ps. We talk about business plan and a number of other aspects associated with funding for new startup companies in the security area. Again, thanks for joining. If the content is connecting with things you're interested in, please remember to subscribe. We have a number of episodes already posted. Please check out the episodes out there. And if there are things here that are of interest to you specifically, please feel free to leave comments. I'm John Duran, and thanks for joining our episode today.
And I'm Drew McFarland. Have a great year.